Incidentally, people ask me, is there anything you would do differently in the campaign? And I always say, yes, there is. If I had it to do over again at the convention in Los Angeles, I would have kissed Tipper longer. But she was struggling, and I just thought it was best to kind of shorten that.
That was Al Gore, April 2002, speaking to Democrats in Florida, the state which cost him the presidential election in 2000, joking about the reason he lost that campaign. Few presidential elections have featured a clearer and more obvious single reason why a candidate lost than 2000. That's when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of George W. Bush over Al Gore during the Florida recount. So perhaps a joke was the best and unique way to explain his defeat. Losing a presidential election is back in the news. On September 23rd, Kamala Harris will publish a memoir on her run for the White House. Her losing effort was the shortest presidential campaign in modern history, which makes this the perfect time to hear other presidential candidates explain why they lost their election. And what do they say about losing? What went wrong? Why failure? Who's to blame? And is it ever the loser's fault? Find out in this episode of C-SPAN's Podcast The Weekly, as we hear exclusively from just one group of people. Time now for the losers. We'll start with 1984. Democrat Walter Mondale lost the general election to Republican President Ronald Reagan. And not just any ordinary loss, he lost big, a landslide. He got 40.6% of the popular vote and won just Washington, D.C. and his home state of Minnesota. And he won that by less than 3,800 votes. Walter Mondale won 13 electoral votes, Ronald Reagan 535. It was the worst electoral college defeat for any Democratic Party candidate in history. A year after the election, in October 1985, Walter Mondale spoke at a Democratic Party fundraiser. He blamed his loss on not getting more votes.
We all know there's some bad news. The Republicans have built a solid base in the Electoral College, while ours has vanished. No Democrat can win the presidency without strength in the South and the West, but we're slipping badly there. No Democrat can win the presidency without solid backing from working men and women, but their allegiance is wavering.
Walter Mondale had more to say about the youth vote in 1984.
Third, we must look to the future. We cannot be accepted as the party of hope if we're perceived only as the party of memory. When I started politics, we were absolutely overwhelmed by the attractiveness of the Humphreys and the Kennedys. In my generation, myself excluded, almost all the young people interested in politics went into the Democratic Party, and it was just the strange ones who drifted over into the other side. And year after year, I think that's been true since the New Deal. And while they've had the money, that overwhelming talent and energy and genius that comes on with each new generation was almost the expected legacy of the Democratic Party. And what is wrong now, and this is the first time it's ever happened to me, the young people have always voted for me until this time, and it hurt, and it still hurts. And so has the Democratic Party lost that support. In the past, the Republicans have had the money, and we've had the young people. This time they had the money and the young people, and frankly, unless we turn that around, we're doomed.
In 1988, another Democrat lost to a Republican. As we heard in his press conference the day after losing, Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis blamed his defeat to Vice President George Bush on negative ads and negative attacks.
Another Democratic politician who was planning to run in 1992 came to you for advice. What advice would you give him that if you had understood it when you started out, it might have made a difference?
What did I say to that young man outside of Philadelphia? Smile a lot and respond somewhat more quickly to attacks against you. Look, there's no question that the negative campaigning hurt us. I had hoped that it would be possible to run a good, strong, positive campaign without having to take up a lot of time responding to those kinds of attacks. I think one of the lessons of this campaign is that you have to respond quickly. That may mean that you have greater difficulty defining yourself and why you're running, and the kind of positive agenda that you want to put forth, but certainly, given my experience this time, I think it means that you do have to deal with those kinds of attacks and have to call them for what they are, which in this case were distorted and oftentimes absolutely false.
In 1988, Michael Dukakis lost to George Bush. In 1992, Bill Clinton beat George Bush. Here is President Bush a week after the election at a fundraiser for Republican members of Congress.
It has been a joy to work with the House leadership. Sometimes you'd have to do stuff by being negative. And when I was during this time being president, why, we've had to accomplish some things by keeping bad things from happening. And both in the House and the Senate, there has been a remarkable show of unity. It put individual senators and individual congressmen in a difficult position because sometimes they had to sublimate their passions a little bit in order to stay with the overall good or stay with the party. And it has not been easy. And that is something, though, that I want to just thank everybody for, because the record was superb. And I think by beating back against tremendous odds, some lousy legislation, we ended up with getting good legislation. I'm afraid in the campaign, in the process, we were accused of being against people because of having to take a stand for fiscal responsibility. But nevertheless, I think on the bottom line, we came out and did the right thing.
President Clinton won again in 1996, beating Republican Senator Bob Dole. Speaking to students in 1997, Bob Dole seemed to blame members of his own party.
I think as I look back, not strictly on the campaign, because that's history and it's over and I lost. But I see things that probably could have been done differently. You know, let's take the abortion issue, which is a very delicate issue, and it's particularly in the Republican Party. I thought we had it all worked out in San Diego, where we were going to bring together pro-choice and so-called pro-life people, and we're going to make a statement. You can all be great Republicans, whatever your view on that issue may be. And that's the way it ought to be. There shouldn't be any litmus tests in our party or the Democratic Party, and something fell apart in San Diego and didn't quite happen that way. You know, if you're going to be a candidate for the presidency of the United States, and sometimes it's very difficult, if you try to satisfy every special interest group, you're probably not, you know, it's going to be very difficult. And I would say in my case, I never was a darling of the far right. And I can look at some of the columns and other things written during the campaign by, quote, conservatives. I always thought I was pretty much of a mainstream conservative. I believed in basic conservative principles, but I also believed that the government served some purpose and that we needed safety nets for people, and we need to make certain when we approach Medicare and Social Security and some of the other programs, we did it very carefully, and we didn't run around shutting down the government just to demonstrate whatever you demonstrate. So the bottom line is you've got to be yourself. Now, I've had a lot of people, I'll confess, since I've been on Leno and Letterman, saying, if I'd have known you were like that, I would have voted for you. Well, we don't want a comedian in the White House, but, you know, wouldn't hurt. A little bit of it would be all right. But so people never get to see the whole person, at least in my case. Maybe that was true. I think it's probably true with President Clinton, too. But he's a very good campaigner, and he adopted a lot of Republican ideas and sort of co-opted the middle ground, and was successful. And the economy was good, too.
At the beginning, we heard from Al Gore, who lost to George W. Bush in 2000. In 2004, John Kerry lost to George W. Bush. Here's the Democratic senator 3 years later.
During the campaign, I mean, right here in Colorado, I remember being down there in the square and talking about climate change and the environment. And, I went to Houston, Texas on Earth Day and did a speech right in George Bush's backyard about global climate change and energy independence. In Iowa, we did things about hog farms and nitrate overload. Wind farms in Minnesota, clean coal technology in West Virginia, offshore drilling in California, cleanup of the Hanford nuclear reactor in Washington. I mean, there wasn't a state where we didn't do these things. But fear and the war was shoved at America in an exploited way that made it very difficult for people to get out from under that 9/11. And when Osama bin Laden appeared on the Friday before the election in that tape, it shifted the last days of that election. You can't go backwards. I'm not going to. We're not going to sit around and say, oh gosh, but for this or but for that.
In 2008, Democrats retook the White House. Senator Barack Obama beat Senator John McCain. Here's John McCain on November 25, 2008, his first press conference before returning to the Senate.
Well, I think we have to understand the lessons that of the election, and that was one of them, among others, is that people want us to be fiscal conservatives. I think if you asked our rank-and-file Republicans and independents that we let spending get completely out of control, that we just basically became a party that had no fiscal discipline, and earmarking and pork barrel spending and passing legislation that laid debt burdens on future generations of Americans. I think that's one of the lessons, and there are many. But I also believe that the American people are deeply, deeply concerned about the economy. And I think that that concern, to a large degree, is very legitimate. And I think that Americans decided, to state the obvious, that they wanted a new stewardship of our country, particularly as far as the economy is concerned. When we started this campaign, you would probably have argued that the war in Iraq was a major issue. And then, of course, the economic issues and success in Iraq, but that combined with the economy made that a major issue. And the American people decided, and I respect that decision. I don't in any way criticize it, and that the economy was of vital importance, and it is, and that they wanted. And so Republicans have to show the American people that we have the solutions to the economic challenges that face this nation.
In 2012, President Obama won again. This time he beat Mitt Romney. Here's Mitt Romney in 2015 speaking to Republicans. Amid speculation he might run a third time for president, Mitt Romney says something more revealing about himself, seeming to imply a reason for his loss 3 years earlier.
Now, I should tell you that in the last few days, the most frequently asked question I get is, what does Ann think about all this? And she believes that people get better with experience. And heaven knows I have experience running for president. And by the way, she knows my heart in a way that few people do. She's seen me not just as a business guy and a political guy, but for over 10 years, as you know, I served as a pastor for a congregation and for groups of congregations. And so she's seen me work with people who are very poor to get them help and subsistence. She's seen me work with folks that are looking for better work and jobs and providing care for the sick and the elderly. She knows where my heart is.
Now we get to the Trump era, when the reasons for losing presidential campaigns are still being analyzed and litigated. Kamala Harris's book about losing to Donald Trump in 2024 will be called 107 Days, the length of her campaign. Hillary Clinton also wrote a book about losing to Donald Trump in 2016. It's called What Happened? In September 2017, Hillary Clinton spoke at the Warner Theater in Washington, D.C. at an event sponsored by Politics and Prose. It was the first stop on a 15-city tour that would take her across the United States and Canada, all the while promoting a book about losing.
I honestly believe we were in a different kind of campaign, unlike any I'd ever seen before. I mean, I've watched people go up and down in campaigns. I've worked in them. I was deeply involved, obviously, in my husband's 2 campaigns. I know the ebb and flow of a campaign. This was really different. And I don't think anybody fully grasped how it was a variation on a presidential campaign, unlike any we'd ever seen. And I, now looking back, see a lot of different, signals about that maybe I could have, and my campaign could have done a better job trying to figure out how to push back on or make more transparent so that people would understand. Boy, I'll tell you what, that campaign of his, they have the best empty podium that anybody's ever seen. I mean, get people to think and even laugh a little bit about what was happening in that campaign. But that didn't happen soon enough, and it didn't happen in quite enough places.
As for the 2020 campaign, when Joe Biden became president, here's Donald Trump in September 2023 explaining what happened. He's speaking to the Concerned Women for America and running for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination.
In 2020, I don't know if you know that, the press doesn't like talking about, we got the most votes in the history of politics for a sitting president. No sitting president, almost 75 million votes. And that's what they say. That's not including the other votes that they forgot about. But we got the most votes in the history of politics. I was told if we got 63 million and we won. And I was told that if we got 63 million, we couldn't lose by the best pollsters. And we got about 12 million more votes than that. And they say we lost. It's horrible. So they rigged the presidential election in 2020, and we're not going to allow them to rig the presidential election of 2024. We're going to bring our country back.
And of course, in 2024, Kamala Harris lost to Donald Trump. And now we wait for her book and book tour to learn why. But while we wait, a bonus clip. Let's hear one more time from another losing general election presidential candidate. Here again, from November 2008, Senator John McCain.
One thing I know about campaigns is that the individual who lost always has that record parsed and examined, and a lot of reasons for failure. And the person who won ran a perfect campaign. That's always the way history treats it. And I will submit myself to the judgment of history. I'm very proud overall of the campaign we ran and the people I was associated with and the dear friends that I have to this day.
That's it for this episode of C-SPAN's podcast, The Weekly. Remember, for the losers, after every presidential campaign, nagging questions always remain. Why did it happen? And who was to blame? Get answers in the C-SPAN video library. For now, thanks for listening and happy searching.